Hi, I'm Peter Tragos, host of the Lawyer You Know podcast and YouTube channel. The saying goes, everyone hates lawyers until you need one. Well, I'm here when you need one to answer your questions and give you insight that you didn't know you needed. Along with my partners, Pete Sardis, the professor, who has a finance and business background, and George Tragos, my dad, and the consigliere, a criminal defense giant, we can answer any questions you have. What's up, everybody, and welcome into a special edition of The Lawyer You Know, where we are just breaking down insurance policies from a lawyer's perspective that handles injury cases, right? So there are tons of different kinds of insurances, and there are an infinite amount of questions and policies and disclosures and exclusions and inclusions, depending on what those policies are. I'm not an insurance agent. I'm not an insurance specialist. I'm not an insurance expert in the general sense and form. But I am an expert in liability insurance and what it actually covers and how that coverage could potentially get denied. So we're not just going to sit here and read a bunch of insurance policies all day today. What we're going to do is look at a couple of the deck sheets, give some definitions, talk about what you should have, what you shouldn't have, what is the correct or proper amount of insurance for you potentially, what that insurance protects if you were to get sued or if you were going to sue somebody else if you were injured because of their negligence. So that's really how we're going to look at it today. And I think this is the best way to kind of streamline an explanation specifically on auto insurance and homeowners insurance policies. If there's enough people that are interested, I expect this to be a small crowd, right? Because we're specifically just talking about insurance policies. But if there is enough interest, we can dig further into specific definitions, specific exclusions, verbiage in these policies, kind of like we did with Amber Heard's policy, and a little more into the weeds. But today I kind of want to have an overview to help people go look at their policies. If you have your car insurance policy or your homeowner's insurance policy, pull it out so we can understand what coverages you have, what they will cover, what they won't. Each state has some differences on insurance and what the minimums can be and things like that. So this is going to be Florida focused, but very general. And most of this applies to most states as far as what your coverages are. Directly after this video at 1 o'clock, this video is going to end. And we are going to play an Alex Murdaugh update video that I made late yesterday because some stuff's happening in that case. And if you don't know about that case, you're going to want to stick around to hear about these wild stories that there will absolutely be a movie on one day, even if it's just a Lifetime movie. But there will absolutely be a movie on that case. It is insane. So stick around for that after this video, or if you're part of the rewatch crew, go check that video out and let me know if you want me to continue to follow that case. So for now, let's look at a fake policy here. And I'm going to kind of let these policies dictate the discussion. All right. So I know there's a way to zoom in here, but it's not letting me zoom. Oh, there we go. All right. So this is a deck page, right? And it's got your name on it, your address, what vehicles are here, which is going to be important when we talk about other parts. Some people have two vehicles on two different policies, which makes no sense, or separate policies, things like that. But when we talk about how many policies and what policies are covered, here is where they list them on the deck page. And then let's get into coverages. Bodily injury liability. A lot of you probably know what this is, but what a bodily injury liability policy or coverage is, if you are driving your car and you hit another car and injure somebody, they can sue you or make a claim against you, and this line item will cover you. This policy will also cover costs to defend you. They will pay for an insurance company lawyer for you. That insurance company lawyer and those attorney's fees do not come out of this limit. So what is the limit? Well, it's $100,000, $300,000 with a slash in between. Some people know what that means. Some people don't. And when you look at this, the $100,000 is per person that you injure. The 300,000 is per accident, meaning if you cause a 10-car pileup and 10 people get injured, it's 100,000 per person, but that would be $1 million, right? No, it is capped at 300,000. So your insurance company would call all of the injured parties, say, let's do a global settlement. We'll each take 30 grand, or if you're hurt worse, will you take a little more? If you're hurt less, will you take a little less? But it is capped at 300 per accident. Now, a lot of policies are 10, 20, same thing. 10,000 per person, 20,000 per accident. Some policies are 25, 50, 250, 500, things like that. There are minimums if you want umbrella coverage to be another cloak of liability insurance above you, meaning if they sue you and there are 10 people and their claims are worth $1 million, you don't have enough. So that means they can either take this amount or sue you personally and get that money out of your bank account if you have it. But if you have umbrella coverage, it's another layer of coverage that covers liability. And there's a liability policy there, $1 million, 1 million, 2 million, 2 million, 4 million, whatever it may be, that's above and beyond this coverage. But most umbrella coverages require you to have a minimum amount of bodily injury coverage here. Most of the time it's 250, 500 or 300, 600 as the minimum amount to where you can then get an umbrella above it. They won't let you put an umbrella on a 1020 policy usually. Next, property damage limit, $50,000. That means the car. You hit a Lamborghini, well, you're only covering 50 grand. You're not covering the total amount of the Lamborghini. If you hit a 2006 not real mobile, it's going to be well within your coverage of $50,000. Again, anything above this coverage, they can come after you personally for. Next, personal injury protection. This is probably a policy from the Northeast that has 250,000. In Florida, PIP is 10,000 most of the time, and that's the minimum that you have to have in Florida. So what is personal injury protection? Whenever you hear about no-fault car accidents or no-fault states, it doesn't mean that there's not a party that's at fault for the accident. It doesn't mean you can't make a claim if somebody rear-ends you or is texting and driving and blows through a red light or a stop sign and T-bones you. It doesn't mean they are not at fault for the accident. What it means is there is insurance that will cover their medical bills no matter who is at fault or even if they are at fault. So if you're at fault, you still have some coverage to cover your medical bills, even though you can't blame anybody else for the accident because you caused it. Well, you could get injured and this policy will cover it. And in Florida, at least, and I think most personal injury protection covers about 80% of the medical bills, which means 20% can still be outstanding. Some states cover 100%. And most states, personal injury protection is not subrogable. So they don't have a right of subrogation for the most part. But if you see MedPay, which may be on another policy, MedPay of 5,000, 50,000, 100,000, that also covers your medical bills, usually 100% of them. But that MedPay, if you do have a claim, that MedPay has a right of subrogation. They can come try to collect that back from you later. Personal injury protection also doesn't just cover the at-fault driver. If you're not at fault, your first $10,000, or in this case, your first $250,000 of medical bills are first going to go to personal injury protection. They're going to pay it. Then you go after the other person's policy. Personal injury protection and MedPay do not cover pain and suffering. They usually just cover medical bills and lost wages, or at least a percentage of lost wages. All these different nuances, and I am going to take a lot of questions at the end. Comprehensive coverage and collision coverage, the differences from those is collision is anything the car hits, and comprehensive coverage is everything else. Emergency road services, and then rental coverage, right? People get very angry when their policies do not have rental coverage. This one is $30 a day up to $900 as a max. A lot of car insurance doesn't have rental coverage. People get upset when theirs don't have rental coverage. The other side doesn't have rental coverage, so they have to pay out of pocket. Sometimes we can get that covered. Sometimes we can get that covered by other parts like the property damage or even in the injury claim sometimes, but you want to make sure you have that if you would need a rental car, if you were to ever get in a car accident and your coverage would be, or your car would be unusable. Okay, now let's look at this one. Part A, liability insurance, bodily injury, $50,000 each person and 100,000 each accident. So some of them break it down like this so you can look at it a little better. Again, property damage. Hold on one second. All right, sorry. First party benefits again, and they call these first party benefits. And here's an interesting part. So third party versus first party. First party insurance means it's covering the person whose policy it is. I am the first party. Third party means if I am suing somebody else or going after somebody else's insurance. So this third party coverage up here is if somebody else goes after this policy owner. If it is your policy, you do not have a right to this bodily injury amount. But you do have a right to the medical pay, med pay, work loss, that's lost wages, funeral expenses, accidental death. This is what we call a death benefit. So if you die in the accident, $10,000 will cover you. And before we get to underinsured motorist coverage, does this have the comprehensive and collision? I don't see that on here separated out. Again, collision is from the collision. Comprehensive is from like if your car burns or whatever, something other than a collision, obviously. Or like a tree falls on it in a hurricane, things like that. You have to have those separate coverages to make sure it'll cover anything that damages your car. All right, the most important part of car insurance. Underinsured motorist. This is what is covering you. If you get in an accident, regardless of what, oh, Rachel just texted me, you guys are looking, I'm looking at something else. Yes, I am. Let me bring this up. That would be helpful, right? If we were all looking at the same thing. This is what I've been looking at. Sorry. So this part up here, the bodily injury is third party liability. You cannot collect this. These first party benefits that I mentioned are your benefits. So medical expenses, $25,000, work loss, $5,000, funeral expenses, $1,500, accidental death, $10,000. Here's where it breaks down as each person, $50,000, each accident, $50,000, property damage, each accident, $50,000. So some policies break it down a little further so that you can actually see what they're talking about. Now, underinsured motorist coverage. Like I said, bodily injury is to cover someone you hurt with a negligent action on your part. If you hit somebody, that bodily injury covers them. But what about if you get hit and you get hurt and your damages are more than their limits, or they don't have any insurance, or they don't have any bodily injury coverage? A lot of people think, oh, it said I have full coverage. Well, in Florida, full coverage doesn't even include bodily injury coverage. Full coverage, and it's so sad when people call me and tell me, oh, I have full coverage, and it's only personal injury protection. It's only PIP. And the other person doesn't have any insurance, and they're screwed. The other person is not collectible. They get angry at us. And really, the only thing I can do to fix it is videos like this to try to tell as many people as possible, look at your insurance policy. Make sure you actually have full coverage. And full coverage, to me, includes underinsured motorist coverage. Now, there are some rules here. You can't get to underinsured motorist coverage or uninsured motorist coverage unless you first go through the BI, if there is any, and show your policy that this person doesn't have any insurance. They have the opportunity to look and see if they think that defendant is collectible. So somebody hits me, they have a 10 policy. I need a surgery. So I have $100,000 in damages. Well, they send me that $10,000. I do a background check and I find out that the person who hit me is uncollectible. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And so I have nothing further to go after other than their $10,000. I bring my insurance company in. I tell them that. They look at my underinsured motorist. They say, okay, fine. We will waive subrogation against that defendant, meaning we're not going to come after that defendant for the money we pay you. They have a right to do that. I know this is a lot, but we knew this was going to be in the weeds. But now we will give you your $50,000 in underinsured motorist coverage if you can prove your case is worth that. They don't just automatically tender this. The personal injury protection and the med pay, you submit a medical bill, they immediately pay that medical bill. No attorney's fees can come out of the medical expenses. No attorney's fees can come out of the PIP. Actually, attorney's fees can come out of MedPay sometimes, but no attorney's fees come out of PIP. That has to be paid directly to the provider or directly to the person for their lost wages if that PIP policy covers lost wages. But underinsured motorist is another policy that you have to fight to get. You have to prove you weren't at fault, even though it's your policy. You have to prove what your damages are, even though it's your policy. And they do everything they can to pay as little or to nothing on these policies. Now, underinsured motorist looks a lot like bodily injury, but it's the coverage again that covers you. So no matter what insurance somebody else has, you're not relying on anybody else to make the right decision. You're not relying on anybody else to have enough money for insurance. You're not relying on anybody else to have enough money to pay for your damages. You're making sure you cover yourself. It's just like health insurance, except better. So here's what it is. Each person, each accident. And here's a nice caveat. Most insurance companies will not allow you to carry more underinsured motorist coverage than you do bodily injury. So a lot of times you'll see these two matching, or the UM can be less. So this could be a 25/50 policy. I would say always max out your UM. So at the very least, match it up to whatever your BI is. And remind me to tell you how you kind of calculate what BI and UM you should have, because that'll be something I'll kind of cover later. So here's a word a lot of people don't understand: stacked, or sometimes it says non-stacked. What does that mean? Well, usually it costs a little bit more to stack coverage. And if you stack coverages, if you think back and remember to the last policy where it showed 2 cars were covered under that policy, so this stacked policy will be stacked twice. So it stacks the insurance per the amount of cars you have on the policy. And what that does is it makes this 5,100 multiply by 2. So you actually have 100, 200 in coverage for UM. So that policy is stacked. So it's times 2. If you have 3 cars, it would be 150, 300. If you have 4 cars, it would be 200, 400. I think you get the gist. 400 per person. I'm sorry, 400 per accident and 200 per person if this was stacked 4 times. Now, the reason you stack it is stacking a 50-100 policy is cheaper than if you try to pay for a 100-200 policy. Sometimes those don't even exist. It's got to be 100-300. So that can be more expensive. Now, here's something you have to check. Go look. Do you have 1 car on your policy and you're paying for stacked insurance? Because you'd be surprised how many times I see that when I look at clients' policies. So make sure you're not paying for insurance that you're not getting. Because when you notify them of it, they'll pull it off. But a lot of times, this somehow goes uncaught by insurance agents and insurance companies that are charging for stacked coverage on policies that only have 1 car. So again, make sure you have underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage. Because this, whether you have $1 million in PIP or $1 million in MedPay, if your life has changed forever, you can't do any of the hobbies you could have done before, and you've got to walk with a cane, or you've got to sit in a couch all day, or whatever it may be, those do not pay for any pain and suffering. So they will cover your medical bills along with your health insurance. They can cover some deductibles, some co-pays, whatever it may be, but they cannot cover any pain and suffering, any attorney's fees. So you can't hire a lawyer to go get those benefits for you because there's nothing to pay the lawyers with, unless you want to pay out of pocket, of course. So make sure you have underinsured motorist coverage to cover people that are driving around without insurance. And I'll keep this up here because there are similar slashes and dashes and per incident and per person on homeowners insurance policies. The general liability portion of it is what covers if someone slips and falls on your property or is injured by a condition of your property. Or like Amber Heard, they can even cover you for certain things you negligently do off of the property. Usually, as we saw with Amber Heard, they don't cover intentional torts. Same thing with bodily injury coverage. They can, based on the verbiage of their policy, deny cases where somebody uses their car as a weapon and purposely crashes into you. If it's an intentional tort, they will usually try to deny the claim. And usually there's verbiage in there that helps them do that. What about DUI accidents? Is that considered an intentional tort? It's a crime. It's per se negligence. So if you're injured in a DUI crash, you can still go after this bodily injury coverage. You can still get your underinsured motorist coverage if somebody else hits you that's a DUI. But what's not covered on these policies is punitive damages, which is also an interesting part of Amber Heard's situation, is her punitives would not be covered under insurance for the most part. So if you have, okay, we pushed the Murdaugh video to 1:15. So I think I'll be fine by 1 o'clock, but we'll see how the questions go. So in a DUI case, you get damages, compensatory damages, and thankful for Johnny Depp's case because everybody understands this concept now. There are compensatory damages, which can be pain and suffering, medical bills, lost wages. But then there can be a separate category of punitive damages to punish the action. DUI accidents, you're allowed to go after punitive damages. But insurance does not cover punitive damages. However, insurance companies have an obligation to protect their insured. So if you have a punitive damages claims, sometimes that can add value to your compensatory damages because if they're able to get out of this claim for the policy to protect their insured, sometimes they do pay when there is the threat of punitive damages on a DUI case because those are usually worse cases because those drivers are more erratic, they're more negligent, they're making horrible decisions, and that's how people get seriously injured or killed in car accidents. So kind of again into the weeds, but this amount does not take into account or cover punitive damages. When we talk about homeowners insurance policies, pipe bursting, fires, hurricane, wind damage, you have to look at each individual section of that policy to show what is covered. And that is separate again from a liability portion, which is if somebody gets hurt on your property. Usually there's some med pay in homeowners insurance policies as well. So that's the main focus. Car insurance, homeowners insurance, liability insurance. Same thing if you own a restaurant or if you own a company. You're going to have a liability insurance policy that's going to have similar numbers that breaks down med pay, if there's a PIP on a car insurance, bodily injury coverage, underinsured motorist coverage. These policies are all very different. And as we saw in Amber Heard's, your homeowner's insurance policy does not cover if you slip and fall in your own house. That's why it's a third-party liability. So now you know the difference between third-party claims and first-party claims. First-party claims are claims you make against your own insurance. Third-party claims are claims you make against somebody else's insurance. Mom highlights. I just got in a wreck yesterday. I found out cops don't determine fault anymore in my state because cops are bad. It's up to the insurance companies to battle it out. I don't know what state you're in, but that's crazy. And if there's any chance that you could be potentially at fault, you need to talk to a lawyer. If you're injured in the case, you need to talk to a lawyer. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to, lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. You can shoot me an email. That's where I'm going to answer specific questions, not legal advice, not specific questions here that are legal advice. I can't answer any of them, just as a disclaimer. She's in West Virginia. Shoot me an email. Mom highlights. All right. Listerine. Athletes can get certain body parts insured for ridiculous amounts of money too. It's their livelihood after all. Yes, disability insurance, a little bit different. But yeah, every profession can get that. If you're not able to do your job, you can insure different parts of your body. Board Game Fangirl. Hello. Finally here for a live. I hope my question gets asked. Should we carry umbrella insurance with our homeowner insurance policy? So let me take a second now to kind of determine and talk about what and how much coverage you should have. Before we answer the questions, I usually do this. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I assume most of you guys are subscribers in this crew that really wants to jump in the weeds on this. At Tragos Law on Instagram and Twitter, and then join our membership if you want to. We're actually having some fun members-only content this week, especially if you're into golf. It'll be some cool stuff for that too. Okay, so how much should you get? There are different philosophies on this. Some people think you get as much as you can afford. My philosophy is you look at how collectible you are, how much money you have in the bank, if you have collectible assets, and if you own multiple properties, if you're worth 7 figures, you want to max out your insurance, 300, 500, or 500 a million as far as liability goes for car insurance, with a couple $1 million umbrella above it. Your home, you want to insure it up to the value it would cost to replace your home. You want to have liability coverage probably in the 6-7 figures. I would actually do the minimum liability coverage on your homeowner's insurance and your car insurance that is allowable under your umbrella policy, and get a bigger umbrella policy. That's usually how I would say to do it. That's what I do. So that's probably what you want to do there. If you make a good living, you've got a good savings account, you have kids, you own a house, you own a car, but not a bunch of crazy collectible assets, I would still say you want to try to push it to the 100, 300 coverage for bodily injury to really protect yourself against most cases. The majority of cases settle for an amount under 6 figures. Of course, there are some huge cases, and if you do that, it's something you're going to have to deal with. But again, if somebody has a $10 million case, wrongful death because you accidentally ran a stop sign and somebody died, horrible to discuss these things, I know. But at that point, it's going to be life-changing for you. You can't make yourself go broke by getting too much insurance, right? So if you can afford 6 figures and you have a good job and a house and a family, I think a 100, 300 policy for BI and match that for UM. If you can't afford to match that for UM, then I advise what I would do, I should say. I shouldn't say advise because this is not legal advice. Don't take this as legal advice. I think best practices, I should say, is bump your bodily injury down a little bit to 50, 100 and match it with your UM. Absolutely match it with your UM to protect yourself, in my opinion. So, and then if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you rent an apartment and you're not very collectible, I would at least still get $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident, match it under the UM. I think $25,50 should be the bare minimum that you get, along with your personal injury protection and med pay potentially. And then when you talk about property damage, you know how much a car costs. So if you can afford $25,000, you can cover totaling a car that's worth $25,000 or less. $50,000, $100,000. Again, I think $50,000 is kind of the medium. I think $25,000 should be the minimum. And then if you can't afford it, up to $100,000, because most cars are worth less than $100,000. Of course, there are outliers, and there are a lot of nice cars that are worth over $100,000. And that's something that you kind of have to determine when you're pinching the pennies as to where to save money. Rental car coverage, the same. Is that something you want to risk paying out of pocket? Because that is a lot less than potential damages somebody could sue you for. But if you do want to have, I think that's a good, that 30 days up to $900, that's probably pretty cheap. And I think that that's probably worth it, because within 30 days, hopefully you can get your car fixed or replaced. I think I hit all of the kind of, thank you, Kimberly. All this talking, it's nice to just have a super sticker up here that I can continue to talk about the amounts. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I would decipher and calculate the amounts. And you need to check it. Even high net worth people, go check it, because you may think you're fully covered with good insurance and you only have a 100 or 300 policy, and you realize if you hit somebody, they're going to come after you and your collectible assets for anything over 100,000. Patty LB, separate policies are sometimes because the company you have is expensive for one of you, so you have to go with the different insurers to save money. But usually, in my experience at least, this could be true. In my experience, that cheaper company will also take over your other car for cheaper and help you get out of that prior contract. I've seen that happen as well too. Sometimes it can be confusing because somebody can forget which policy they have it under, and insurance companies can point the finger at each other. So I like a streamlined, easy, unarguable situation. But you bring up a good point in my head. Company cars or Uber or using a vehicle for commercial purposes. Make sure you let your insurance company know that. Sometimes they will deny coverage. Sometimes they will charge more. But if you're driving for Uber and you hit somebody and you think I've got full coverage, Uber may deny that claim because you didn't tell them you were using that car for Uber. Or if you own your own company and you're using it for company purposes, like your delivery driver delivering things, make sure you put your insurance company on notice for that. Vintage Willow. My dad was riding his bike and got hit by a car. Underinsured on all 3 of our cars. That he is on covered him was a lifesaver. Absolutely. Your underinsured motorist coverage does not just cover you when you're in your car. It covers you when you're in somebody else's car. driver or passenger. It covers you when you're riding your bike. It covers you when you're riding, when you're walking, when you're riding on rollerblades. Now, usually there are exclusions if you're riding an uncovered motorcycle or moped or things like that. So check your policy. There are separate policies for motorcycles. Most car insurance policies, if you don't list the motorcycle, it is a specific exclusion. Same thing with boats and jet skis for the most part. Barbara, is stacking coverage available in all states? I don't know the answer to that. Sparrow, Peter, can you review policies for clients? I review all of my clients' policies. If you have a car accident, you hire us, we review your policy and the policy of whoever hit you. Listerine, I just texted my agent to send me a copy of my policy. Good. Most insurance companies now, if you have the app, you can get your deck page and your card just like that. So ask them if that's available as well. If you have an old car, is it better to just have liability or full coverage? Always better to have full coverage, because just because you have an old car doesn't mean you might not hit a Mercedes S-Class that you've got to cover some of their property damage, which could either come out of your pocket or out of your insurance policy. But if it's a one-person accident or you're at fault and you wanted to cover yours, then yes, that amount could be less, but you've got to take both into account here. So match bodily injury with underinsured motorists and max it out. Yes, I would say it in the reverse, Jill. Match UM with BI, because you can have more BI than UM, but not vice versa in most jurisdictions. Suzanne Richardson, thank you for the super chat. So Azam, I am looking at my car insurance now. It states loss of both legs, both hands, loss of both eyes, etc. Several losses on this policy. Does that mean bodily injury? If it's talking about other people, yes, that's your third-party bodily injury coverage. If it's talking about if you lose arms or legs, then it's talking about first-party underinsured motorist or PIP or MedPay of some sort. I know you're in a different jurisdiction, so they might use different words than bodily injury, but usually they'll use at fault or not at fault or liability or first party or third party or you or the insured versus a non-insured. All those are kind of verbiage that explain the same things. Tori, what insurance company is the hardest to deal with? In my experience, it's Liberty Mutual. They do not want to pay anything at all. I will just say most insurance companies don't want to pay anything at all. So certain insurance companies like Direct General or The General, or I think it's Hartford, who just there's another one, Infinity, I think, who just don't really write bodily injury policies in Florida. They're also different per state sometimes. But State Farm is difficult to deal with, your neighbor or whatever. Geico is difficult to deal with. There are lots that are very difficult to deal with that we have had knockdown, drag out fights with. How much does that end up being per month? $25.50. So Toots, this depends on a million factors: where you live, what your driving record is like, how old you are, all sorts of things. Because 16-year-old boys, I think, are the most expensive people to insure. People with lots of accidents and speeding tickets, more expensive to insure. So this really depends on the insurance company, your driving record, and your demographics. What about MedPay? What's best practices there? So Jill's Joyce. MedPay is fine. I worry more about underinsured motorist coverage, honestly. A $5,000 or $10,000 MedPay policy is probably fine. I even think some policies look fine with no MedPay. I think I have 5,000 MedPay on mine, maybe 10, 5 or 10, something like that. What do you think about Travelers, Grammy Rose? I've had some good experiences, some bad experiences with Travelers. I think my dad has Travelers. He either used to or does. Mindy, Peter, would it be possible for you to do this for a renter's policy? That would be awesome. Yes, potentially, especially breaking down like what it would cover and what not compared to the landlord and liability. So if you guys want to see renters policies, the Rewatch crew and now, let me know in the comments. We own a small farm with some livestock. One time a pig escaped, ran in the road, and got hit by a car. What is the best addition to a homeowner's policy to protect us from being sued in this case? It would be a liability policy, because you didn't do anything on purpose to have the pig run out, but it was a condition from the home that caused, if that person got hurt that hit your pig, that caused an injury. So they would be covered under your homeowner's policy because a negligent act caused an injury of another, and that negligent act originated from the home. That's what I would argue, at least. Now, if there are separate things because you technically run a farm, ask your agent to make sure that would be covered under liability. And if not, make sure you add whatever you need to be added for livestock and animals, because obviously I do think they add more risk than just a normal home that doesn't have things that are going to be leaving the home causing issues. Anyone have a recommendation for motorcycle insurance? I could only find it through Progressive. So a lot of different companies do have it, but I've heard it can be costly and kind of cost preclusive at time. I don't own an insurance or a motorcycle, so I've only had some motorcycle insurance policies on my clients' cases. So I don't know necessarily. I don't pay attention to how much it costs. Gabby, Peter, I rent my home, so this year I bought a content policy. What some people don't know is that these are fairly cheap. Yes, content, but if somebody comes and slips and falls in your house, you might not have any liability coverage on it, just a contents policy. Liability coverage is usually more expensive because it's a lot more coverage. Does legal land distinguish between accident and crash? Because few crashes are truly accidental, plane crashes. So why do cars have accidents? It's what causes them, right? So just because you do something dumb or you do something wrong, like drink and drive or text and drive, you can say they made a conscious decision to text, so it wasn't an accident. They made a conscious decision to drink and get behind the wheel, so it wasn't an accident. But because no matter what they were doing, they did not mean to hit another car. They didn't intend to hit another car. That's usually why they are categorized as accidents. Barb, we tried getting a rental when the car was in the shop and it was $100 a day. So insurance does not cover much with the inflation of prices. You can get more coverage. But if it is $30 a day, you're right. If the rental actually costs $100, that's $70 out of pocket you're going to have to pay. Does an auto policy cover lost wages? If I'm hit by an uninsured driver, I'm in Texas, I do have full coverage. It depends. You've got to look at your PIP coverage or your wage loss coverage to see if they do cover lost wages. Most coverages in Florida cover like 65% or something of lost wages that you submit to them. But it's not capped, right? So let's say you have $10,000 in PIP. You go to the hospital and that's $7,000 of your PIP gone like that. You have $6,000 of lost wages. They only have $3,000 left. They'll pay $3,000 to you in lost wages, but now you can take those lost wages and you can still go after the at-fault party, and their liability coverage will cover your lost wages. Their liability coverage will cover your medical bills over the $7,000 already covered by the hospital by PIP. Their liability coverage will cover pain and suffering. And if they don't have any liability coverage, your underinsured motorist policy stands in their shoes. It stands in the shoes of the at-fault driver. I worked for an insurance broker a number of years ago. This may be a silly question, but do you have brokers in the U.S.? It depends on your definition of brokers. We do have brokers, but I need some more specific of what you mean by an insurance broker. Amy, how do you prevent being underinsured owning a business? Make sure that, first off, your business is protected and an LLC is not something that's collectible if you are sued for something personally. And then make sure you have enough insurance that covers the value of your business on a commercial side. Alinti, question. After my stepdad died, a lawsuit from an accident he had a year and a half before came to be. My mom was held liable and they hit that umbrella as well. Why was she liable? So she personally couldn't have been liable. If she had all of his estate's assets, they can go after his estate. So let's say they sue him for $100,000 and he has an estate that he died and left $500,000. They can collect that $100,000 from his estate. Jill's Joys, thank you so much again for the super chat. How can companies refuse to pay when they claim an acute injury is a chronic injury after a motorcycle accident? 13, Sun Juan, this is what I argue about every day. I mean, I was just dealing with depots and stuff yesterday about them trying to say everything with my client was from an accident 10 years ago when he did barely any treatment. Then he gets in this accident and has surgery. They say, oh, it was all pre-existing and we have to fight about it. And you got to show it. You got to prove it with doctors, with MRIs, with objective findings, with subjective findings, with a clinical correlation. A lot of work goes into proving that. Jill's Joys, thank you again. Azam, thank you. Cher asks, I think I am overinsured. My policy says bodily injury 250, 500. Do you match that with That's my first question. If you have an inexpensive policy that you can afford and you think it's a lot of insurance like this, I wouldn't cut it down just to save $100 a year. It's really not worth it. This will make sure you are covered. But I would say if you make $50,000 a year in your job and you don't own multiple properties, 250 may be a lot. But if you make $100,000 a year and you own your house, if you own a business or a partner in a business or have a really good job where they could potentially garnish your wages, I don't think 250, 500 is necessarily automatically overinsured. I would err on the side of more insurance if you can afford it and it works within your budget rather than less. AD, should my insurance have a choice of law clause? Yes, and usually it's in the state that you live in is what it should be. Cindy Callahan, can you talk about malpractice and tail insurance? Again, it's another kind of would take a deep dive. If you guys are interested, though, I'll do it. So let me know in the comments if you want me to talk malpractice insurance, tail coverage, or any other kind of insurance. If we get enough comments below from this crew and the rewatch crew, the 2 live crew and the rewatch crew, then we will do another video. Jill's Joys, lost wages isn't listed on my policy, so it's not covered. Look into where it describes your personal injury protection. Because when it describes personal injury protection, if you have that, I don't know what jurisdiction you're in, but it'll sometimes say personal injury protection will cover 65% of lost wages up to whatever. Toots, pet insurance is another category we could potentially vote on. Janelle M. I have Geico and carry my 19-year-old as a driver. Is there an age insurance companies typically want them on their own policy? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Whenever it works out for him to start paying his own. Now, sometimes if he's on your policy, then sometimes they could punch into your umbrella policy, where if he's on his own, then they can only go after his policy. And if he has no assets and no money, he's less collectible. So sometimes people do separate their children from their policies. But again, that's probably something you want to ask a collections lawyer about or a business law lawyer about rather than me just talking about liability insurance. Marty Ross, if renting and a slip and fall, would not the property owner and their insurance on the property cover? That depends. And a lot of times the answer is no, because if there's not an indemnity clause, so some clauses will say, yes, the landowner is going to be liable for that. Now, there are differences also. Are we talking about renting a house or an apartment? Because if it's an apartment complex, somebody falls on the stairs outside, obviously it's the owner of the apartment complex. But if it's inside your apartment, or if it's at your house that you rent from somebody else and you control the premises or you control the floors and you left something on the floor and it caused them to slip and fall, they can come after you. And if there's no indemnity clause to the landlord, they can come after you, which is why you probably want to have some liability coverage on your rental coverage. If it's not cost preclusive, of course. I'm not telling anybody to go bankrupt by paying for insurance. LJ Trekker, question covering the difference between car value and loan exceeds car value. So that is called gap insurance. And that's something that everybody's got to determine. Do they want that? If you take out a big loan for a car and you owe $25,000 on the car, when you get in the accident, it's only worth 10, you're going to be out of pocket that 15,000. So if you want to, insurance is also a lot about risk aversion. If you don't think that's going to be a problem for you, don't think that's going to happen for you, you don't get it. If you are worried about that and you can't afford the difference between the two cars, then you get the gap insurance. Melanie Chambers, thank you for the super sticker. AD, in a car accident, why does car accident pay medical bills and not health insurance? Sometimes health insurance does pay. Sometimes health insurance won't pay if there is a liability claim. Sometimes doctors, like a lot of primary care physicians, do not take personal injury protection or car insurance or any car accident cases, even if you have health insurance and are treating with them. So there's a lot of dynamics. And just so you know, if your health insurance does pay your medical bills, for the most part, again, the caveat, and especially in Florida, if they do pay a lot of your medical bills and you get a car accident settlement, your health insurance has a right of subrogation against that car insurance settlement because you can't collect twice for the same medical treatment. For example, health insurance pays $20,000. You get a $50,000 car accident. your health insurance can come after part of that $50,000 to reimburse them and pay that $20,000 in subrogation. Thank you, Sheila Woodbury. Last appointment went long. I have another appointment in about 5 minutes. So we got about 5 more minutes here. Kelly, can we discuss supplemental disability insurance? We can talk about it. It's not really my specialty because I'm not making a lot of claims against disability insurance. Share, check your homeowner's policy. I was insured for $250. Rebuild cost is $950. Way underinsured. Yes. Check it, people. And the prices have gone up. If anything, my homeowner's insurance, I'm not even going to talk about on here, but they recently stopped for my zip code and I had to get a new one. And with property values skyrocketing to crazy levels in my area, at least, just double check everything. SIG, as a foreign tourist visiting Florida, renting a car, what are the insurance I will need? My travel insurance may cover some, but LDW, ALI, PAI, I don't know what those acronyms are. Your travel insurance may cover some, but get the rental insurance. And you can look at all the same stuff on the rental insurance, bodily injury coverage, collision coverage, underinsured motorist coverage. Make sure you get underinsured motorist coverage because in Florida, 20 to 25% of people drive with no bodily injury coverage at all because they think they're fully covered with PIP or they have no insurance at all. So if you live in Florida or are driving in Florida, bring your coverage or get rental coverage. And if you're using your coverage here in Florida, make sure they know you're renting a car so your covers. Thank you again, Janelle M, for the super sticker. Richard Haddad, thank you for all that info and thanks for your time. Off topic, Musk v. Twitter. Is it true he waived due diligence? Does Twitter suing him mean they still won't need to provide accurate bot info? So I have not looked at this case, but I think I'm going to do a video on it tomorrow. What do you guys think? Do you want to see me do a video on Twitter versus Musk? It's not an injury claim, so it's outside my wheelhouse, but it is still civil litigation, so it is something I can cover. If you guys want to see Twitter v. Musk, put it in the comments. I'm planning on looking into it tomorrow if I have some time and potentially doing a video on it then. Amanda S., can you make a claim against Citi Risk Management insurance policy if you trip on the sidewalk and break your leg? Yes. A lot of places have sovereign immunity to where there are caps what you can collect. Like in Florida, it's 200, 300, but we're working on changing that. Some sovereigns actually have insurance policies. Some are self-insured. But yes, the same applies. You can go after them if they were negligent in maintaining the sidewalk, stairs, whatever it may be. If they were negligent in that maintenance, then you can go after them. Melanie Chambers, I have a £5 million liability insurance for my business here in the UK. That is the minimum. Can't believe I'm watching a video on insurance and finding it interesting. Thank you, Melanie. That's a great minimum. And I think especially Florida needs better minimums on all this stuff. Janelle M., are you covering the Sarah Boone trial? I think I saw a couple comments on this. I don't know who that is. I don't know what that trial is. So I'm not planning on covering it right now. But enough of a wave and a groundswell of interest could always change that on this channel. I feel like a dead horse or like a record where I keep repeating myself, but that's why I want to put these potential topics up. So if you guys are interested, let me know in the comments. Let me know on the community page. Janelle, since you're a member, let me know on the members page. Maybe we can post a poll in the members only spot to see if they're interested in this case or others, because that's where we get a lot of our content from. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us here. Again, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. I appreciate everybody joining. I appreciate all the questions. PL Demore Gray says, do I see a different wristwatch today? It looks nice. Don't you also sometimes wear a GMT? Yes, good eye. This is a different one. I'll let you try to guess what this one is. I don't know if you can see it based on that. But yes, I like to change it up once in a while. So yes, thank you all for everything. I hope you have a great rest of the Wednesday hump day here. Hope everybody's week's going well. Stay tuned because in about 5 or 10 minutes, we are going to play that Alex Murdaugh case, that Alex Murdaugh update. Azam. Hi, Peter. How can I buy get/buy your firm t-shirt, the Trago Stars and Tragos t-shirt? Here's what I'll say, Azam. Reach out to lawyeryouknow@gmail.com and we will figure out a way to get it to you because they are not for sale. They are only in giveaways. But let's talk. All right. You guys are awesome. Appreciate you as always. Until next time, let me know what you think of that Alex Murdaugh update for sure. If you can stick around, the 600 or 700 of you that are here now, stick around for that. Let me know what you think. I love hearing your thoughts. Cindy, how do you get in the members section? There's the join button in the description. If you're on your cell phone, sometimes it doesn't work. You may have to go to the actual website, youtube.com, lawyer you know, and join there. Or on a desktop, people have said it's easier. People always are willing to help in the comments too if anything's going wrong with you trying to join. But Cindy, I hope you can join. It'll be fun. You guys are the best. I appreciate it. Maybe, just maybe, we'll talk about picking a couple members and talking about their insurance policies with them privately. We'll see. Okay. Appreciate you all. Until next time.